let's talk about printmaking, specifically Lino-Cut printmaking. I hope you enjoy the video. So what I'm going to be doing first is transferring my sketch onto my linoleum, and I like to use soft cut linoleum. I find it really easy to do hand printing with, which is what I do. And I like to do my sketches on tracing paper. I find it really easy to transfer my sketches from tracing paper onto my linoleum because I find the pencil just leaves the surface of the tracing paper really easily. And when I'm trying to line up my drawing with my piece of linoleum, since the tracing paper is see-through, it's really easy to tell sort of where I'm putting it. So I flip my sketch over pencil side down, I tape it in place so it won't shift around as I'm doing this process, and I use a wooden spatula to apply pressure to the surface of my drawing so that the pencil will transfer over onto my linoleum. I like a wooden spatula because of that nice straight edge that it has on the end of it. I find that it has a good surface area so that I can transfer my pencil really easily to my linoleum. So there we go. And now that it's on there, I will go over it with Sharpie so that it won't smudge or disappear as I'm carving. I also like to add Sharpie to my sketch on my linoleum because the thickness of the Sharpie lines somewhat mimics the thickness of the lines that I actually want to have in my carving. The pencil lines are a little bit too thin to achieve for me, so this Sharpie line thickness is sort of what I'm going for when I'm actually carving. When I transfer my drawing onto my linoleum, it's backwards from the way that I actually want it to be printed on the paper. And the reason for this is that when you flip your carving around or you put your paper over top of it, it will print in reverse to what's actually on your linoleum or what you've actually carved. So if you want your image to go a certain way, you have to apply it backwards and do your carving in reverse to what you actually want to have in the end. So I wanted to include some real-time carving in this video because I've just learned over time that taking your time with the carving is so important. When you're carving something like this, you really only have one chance at it. If you slip and mess up, sometimes there's no coming back from it, and I've done that too many times where I have just not taken my time, or I've been carving when I'm kind of sleepy and I mess it up and I regret it because then I have to start all over again. So taking your time is super crucial, and this clip right here is sped up, but the beginning was real time. And I'm using this carving tool by Speedball. It's just a printmaking sort of gouge chisel tool, and it's sort of shaped like a V, and essentially what it does is it just scoops the surface of the linoleum away, and it's almost like a little sharp shovel. And I'm removing all of the material that I don't want to have in my finished print. So everything that I leave alone will pick up ink and transfer to the paper, and everything that I take away will remain the paper. As I'm carving, usually after I've done one sort of round of carving around those initial Sharpie lines that I make, I go over what I've carved with a larger Sharpie and completely cover the block with it. This way, as I start to add smaller and smaller details around what I've already carved or into what I've already carved, I can really see what I'm doing. After I kind of carve away or carve around some of those first Sharpie lines, they sort of disappear and it starts to be it starts to become difficult to see what I'm trying to do. So just adding a layer of Sharpie over everything after round one of carving, you could say, it just makes the process easier to just see what's going on. So here's some more real-time carving. I'm just really carefully taking my time to decide how I want to carve out the details on the body of this little seahorse here. Something I've learned through creating lots of carvings is to carve in the direction that you want things to appear that they are going. So on the body of this seahorse, all these little ribs and like kind of like bumps on its body are more horizontal. So I want to kind of go with the flow of the shapes, and I find that that actually makes my carvings look so much better than if I'm sort of just carving in any sort of direction. I just like to have a purpose to the direction and the shapes that I'm creating. So with this seahorse, what I'm doing is I'm actually leaving a lot of the area as positive space. Sometimes when I create carvings, I carve out everything that's on the inside of the drawing and I leave sort of an outlined appearance. With this one, I want to leave the actual thing that I'm carving, the seahorse, as an area that will pick up a lot of ink. So I'm just kind of, every time I make a carving, I try to think about how I'm using the positive and negative space within my design. And what I mean by that is the positive space is the areas that will pick up ink and be printed, and the negative space being the areas where the paper will show through. And you really don't have to remove a ton of the surface from your linoleum when you're carving. You only have to remove just a very, 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 very shallow amount of the material, and it will print just fine. So you don't have to dig really deep when you're carving. In fact, in these little markings in the face, it's just the smallest little shaving that I'm taking off of the surface of the linoleum, and it prints really, really well. So now that I've sort of carved out most of the details in this print, I want to spend some time removing all of the negative space that I want. So that area where the paper is going to show through, an area where the ink isn't going to stick to. So I like to very carefully go around the major areas or the major shapes that I've created and start removing the majority of the material that I don't want to keep in my design. I tend to kind of go around the shape first and then remove the largest area second. I find if I go around my shapes first, it kind of gives you a bit of a barrier between the large area that you're carving away and the shapes you're trying to preserve. If I try to remove everything all at once, sometimes I slip a little bit. So just very carefully going around everything first and then removing all of the material sort of in the middle of it, I find works really well for me. So something I really like to focus on in my carvings is adding texture, but I also find that I can add some three-dimensionality as well. So I'm carving into these little seaweed air bubbles and adding some texture to them so that they appear a little bit more three-dimensional. Now I'm going to get into printing. I have a brayer or an ink roller, I have a palette knife, and I have a wooden spatula. And here's the ink that I like to use. It is an oil-based ink by Speedball that is water soluble. So first thing I want to do when I'm printing is I want to set up what's called registration. This one is pretty loosey-goosey. I'm only doing a 1-layer print, so I'm not as picky about my registration, but I still like to make one, and registration is all about lining up your paper with your print. So I like to use these clear plastic sheets that I get from some canvases from a job that I had a while ago. And I will put my paper on it, make some marks with a Sharpie on the corners of the paper, and then connect those dots together to create a square or rectangle shape that is the exact same size and shape as my paper. And then I will also trace around my carving lined up exactly where I want it to go, so that when I'm printing, I will line up my carving with the tracing that I did of it, and then I will line up my paper with the tracing that I've done of it as well, and everything will line up exactly the way that I want it to. Alright, so I'm going to take some ink, and using a oil-based ink, you really don't need a lot of ink on your print or on your carving. I like to lay it out like this so that when I'm putting my roller through it, it picks up an even amount of ink. So laying out your ink bed, I like to pick the roller up as I am moving it back and forth so that I create this sort of very thin layer of ink on a piece of glass. And I'm sort of listening for a hissing sound, but I don't want it to be really goopy. It's just a very, very thin layer of ink that I pick up on my roller, on my brayer, and then I will roll it onto the surface of my carving. And I'm just going for a very thin, even layer of ink over the entire carving. If you have too much ink, you can kind of destroy some of the details in your print. They get filled in with the ink. And if you don't have enough, it won't pick up on the paper as much as you would like it to. So what I'm doing here is very carefully lining my paper up with the tracing of it that I did on that plastic sheet. I very carefully lay it down and hold it in place with my hand as I go over it with that wooden spatula again. I like to apply a nice firm, even pressure over the entire area that's being printed, and I just like to make sure that I have gotten every single piece of the carving with the pressure that I'm applying, and then I can peel and reveal it. And there's the print all finished up. I hope you enjoyed watching the video and you learned some things about Lino-Cut printmaking. I have an online shop that I will put in the description box in this video if you'd like to check out my work and support me. I really appreciate it, and I also appreciate you watching this video. I hope you subscribe to watch more videos from me in the future.